Andy, Barney, Opie, Goober, Floyd the Barber. That's some of the names from The Andy Griffith Show. Drop by Two Chairs No Waiting, the Andy Griffith Show fan podcast, and we'll visit with some of those folks, along with tribute artists and fans and just all kinds of things related to The Andy Griffith Show. I'm your host, Alan Newsom, and you can find the show, Two Chairs No Waiting, at twochairsnowaiting.com or on iTunes.
Howdy, partners. You're listening to Conversations with Jacob, hosted by my good friend, Jacob Waller. Make sure to check out the podcast where podcasts are available and check out the video version on YouTube. You can follow us on social media. Facebook is Conversations with Jacob. Twitter is at CWJ Podcast. And you can visit our website, conversationswithjacobpodcast.weebly.com. Hey, you got a show idea? Maybe a guest suggestion? Email us at conversationswithjacob@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Jacob Waller.
And what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Conversations with Jacob. Today is episode number 63, and today we got a good episode lined up for you. But before we get to our guest this week, I want to make a few announcements. So make sure to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, has the intro said by Jake Thorne. We're on Facebook. As of right now, the podcast is not on Twitter. It was at one point, but it's not no more because I can't manage two accounts at one time. So, also if you got a suggestion, you can send it to the email conversationswithjacob@gmail.com. Website is conversationswithjacobpodcast.weebly.com. Check out upcoming episodes, past guests, and all that good stuff. Also check out Two Chairs No Waiting, a Andy Griffith fan podcast hosted by Adam Newsom. twochairsnowaiting.com, and also on YouTube. Also, if you like cars, check out the Rocky Mount Virginia Cruise in 2024. They've already had the one for May, so check out the one for June 1st, 2024, and also July 6th of 2024. How the cruising goes from 5 to 10 p.m. That's at the Franklin County High School, the Lowe's parking lot, the Rocky Mountain Smokehouse, and the Shoals parking lot. And joining me today is Dustin Long, who is the NBCSports.com editor for NASCAR. So without no further ado, and let's bring Dustin to the platform. What's going on, Dustin?
Hey, Jacob. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. So I guess to get things here kind of kicked off with the podcast, and how did you get into being a editor for NBC Sports?
Well, I've always wanted to be a sports writer, and I had an uncle who was a sports writer for the Miami Herald for about 35, 36 years, and so was always intrigued with the things that he got to cover. He covered Florida. He was at the Miami Herald, and he covered Florida State football for many years. He covered the Dolphins for a few years. Did a lot of auto racing, covered the Olympics, did interviews with Muhammad Ali and all sorts of other famous athletes through the years. So always enjoyed sports, always enjoyed writing, and having him in the family was probably something else that motivated me and pushed me to be a sports writer and to kind of find my path to telling stories about the different folks involved in sports.
Now, and how did you get into writing about NASCAR? Did that just come along kind of later in life, or did that start kind of right away?
Well, I grew up in Indiana, so I was always a basketball fan and a motorsports fan with the Indianapolis 500. So, my dad used to take me to sprint car or midget car races in Indiana to all sorts of dirt tracks and some of the paved tracks and so forth. So, I was always around racing as a kid and always enjoyed that. And like I said, growing up in Indiana, an hour or so away from Indianapolis Motor Speedway, my interest was more in IndyCar racing growing up than NASCAR. I mean, I enjoyed all forms of motor racing, but certainly was exposed a lot more to IndyCar racing. But always wanted it to at some point in my career be able to cover motorsports at some point, and it kind of worked out later in life.
Now, since you cover NASCAR, do you got a favorite track or driver?
I guess it's always nice to go home to Indiana, and so Indianapolis Motor Speedway is always something special to me, just because that was like a track where I was one of those kids whose mom took him out of school to go to Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and that was the first time I went to the track. Was she took me out of elementary school, and we went to the track for Carburation Day. So, always. So that's always Indianapolis Motor Speedway has many special memories, and I've been to the Indianapolis 500 a number of times, and in the last few years have taken my mom back to the track because she really enjoys it. So it's kind of she took me to the track. My dad was always into racing, took me to the races, but she was the one who took me to Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and I've tried to pay her back through the years by taking her to the 500. She enjoys that. So that one is that one certainly has a sentimental value for me over other tracks because I've been going there since a little kid. I think there's certainly a lot of great tracks. Martinsville is one I've covered for many, many years, and it's certainly a throwback, and it's you get a different vibe there than you do going to Daytona. Just as you get a different vibe with going to Daytona compared to, a Las Vegas or Phoenix type of track. So, I think a lot of the tracks all kind of have their special things and special moments. So, as far as a favorite driver, the drivers I was a fan of when I was a kid were kind of the sprint car or midget car drivers in the Midwest. And so there were a number of those drivers because that's what I was exposed to at that point.
Now, since you're an editor, and how much time does it go in? How much time and how much hours does it go into doing the stuff that you do with the online stuff?
It's a full-time job. It keeps me busy all the time. I think technically I'm supposed to have a couple days off a week, and if I can take a few hours off here and there, sometimes that's all I get. So because there's enough stuff to do. Now my boss would say, "Hey, go ahead and take the time off," but I always find enough work to do. So there's always something going on, especially with NASCAR. There's always work to do. There's always different things to do, and even if it's a slow period, if I don't have as much, I can go watch film of if wherever the next race is and go watch the most recent race and just kind of remind myself of certain things, or kind of make sure I'm aware of certain things going back to that track for the first time since. So it's a lot of busy work, but there's also interviews, setting up interviews, keeping track of what's going on, talking to people, and so forth. So it does keep me busy, that's for sure. I think sometimes my wife says I keep busier than she wants me to, but it does keep me busy.
So since you do this job, do you go from track to track, or how does that work?
I do travel to a lot of the races, and I think my record is 1 year, several years ago, I'm going to say I did about 33 of 36 points races. So that was a lot of travel. I think typically I go to about, a number of years have been like 27, 28 or more. So they're still skipping about 8 to 10 races or so. But I mean, it's a busy schedule for sure. So, and then even on the weekends that you're not traveling, there's still work to do that you can do remotely these days now with everything so well connected.
Now, back at the Daytona 500, and by the time this goes up, it had already done passed. But back at the Daytona 500, and what did you think about that close finish?
Yeah, I tell you what, the way the season started was a lot of interesting things with how things ran at Daytona and that fantastic finish at Atlanta that everybody was talking about, that 3 wide finish. But I think Daytona is just a spectacle, and it's one of the things I always like to do. I'm often on pit road before a race, but certainly there is quite a lot of energy and excitement before the Daytona 500 when you're on pit road. There's so much more crowd on pit road. There's the festivities. You get the Thunderbirds flying over. And it certainly is a magical moment before a race, especially at Daytona. But again, it is a cool moment before the race at any of these events, and it's always, to me, I'm always fascinated. It's fun to watch the crew guys after they do the prayer and the anthem, and then they do their high fives or whatever they do to kind of get fired up, and then get in a huddle and some inspirational things, maybe a small quick prayer, and then get ready to go to work for the next few hours. And that's always I always kind of like watching that, hearing the hands slapping, the high fives just before the engines get fired.
Now I want to go back to another Daytona a moment. And what did you think about the Ryan Newman crash a few years ago?
Yeah, this is my 26th season covering NASCAR. So I've been at Daytona for 24 Daytona 500s. And so seen some spectacular moments, seen some, awful moments. Was there when Dale Earnhardt was killed in 2001. And that was not a crash that you would have expected that would have turned out like that. You kind of thought, Tony Stewart, if you remember that race, flipped down the back straightaway, and that was the one you thought, oh my gosh, how badly is this driver hurt? But yeah, the Newman one was a very scary crash, just like the Austin Dillon crash into the fence in 2015 in the July Daytona race, and that tore down a bunch of fencing. Was that you had Larson in the fence in an Xfinity race one year? Jeff Bodine's crash in the truck at Daytona, I want to say that was 99, when they went flipping through the front stretch, and then as it was shedding parts and pieces, got hit by another truck, and you really thought, somebody's hurt bad. And it's Jeff made it through, obviously. So the Newman crash was a scary crash. It's you have to, I think it's easy to forget, because people just watch the cars go around the track, that it's easy to forget that there's actually a person in those cars.
Oh yeah.
And so, I look at it a little differently, in the sense, because I know those people, I talk with those people, I have, talk with them, just in the garage, in the media center, so forth. So you're always kind of aware that there's always a person, and just from a personal standpoint, you don't want to see anybody get hurt. And, it can be a scary situation for sure.
Now, do you think that the Dale Earnhardt accident kind of made NASCAR kind of safer today than it was back then?
Safety's changed tremendously since then. And obviously, I remember, you go back to 2000, and that was the year where Adam Petty was killed in a crash in New Hampshire, and then and that was in May, and then in July, Kenny Irwin was killed in a crash in New Hampshire, and then you had, I think it was October, Tony Roper killed in a crash in Texas in a truck race. So you have 3 driver fatalities in 2000. And then you start 2001 with Dale Earnhardt. Certainly, there were things that were being done with safety in response to the accidents of 2000. What happened in 2001 certainly sped things up, and it made NASCAR look at, I think even more so outside the sport, to outside experts. And they brought in outside experts to examine the Dale Earnhardt crash, and put out a 2-volume report that still sits on my desk on the accident and what happened, and so forth. And, you look at now with what NASCAR has, an R&D center, has dedicated people looking at various elements of the car for not only performance, but for safety. They have safety specialists. Now a lot of these drivers have these mouth guards that they're wearing, that are registering, kind of the G-force spikes that the body is taking in these accidents. And so that's helping, NASCAR and other professionals understand what these drivers go through in a crash, and to kind of help make them safer. I mean, obviously, you look at the interior of the car from, the late 90s to today, and it's just like, it's a world of difference. And the seats are safer. There were no Hans devices back then. And they've certainly enclosed in the driver in kind of almost a little bit more of a capsule, and than what it was back then. And then you also have the safer barriers, and that's made a tremendous difference in the sport, and helped a lot of drivers because there were some brutal crashes that drivers have had. I mean, you talk about, like, just this year and even last year, Ryan Blaney said he had registered a 55G spike hit in his crash at Daytona this year. And then he also said in his Daytona crash, in the regular season finale in 2023, and the hard impact there was a 70G spike. Those are high forces that a body is experiencing, but the way the safety has been done, that he can get out of the car and walk away, whereas 25 years ago, he does not walk away most likely.
Now, I've seen on I think it was Facebook about a NASCAR rule or a penalty that occurred with Joey Logano because he was wearing some type of glove. And if you've seen that, can you tell us what your opinion is on that?
Yeah, that was back at Atlanta, and you think about it, at super speedways. How many times in the last couple of years have you seen the drivers on their qualifying lap stick their hand out of the window? And obviously, you have the window net up, and that's kind of close. It's kind of meshed in closely, but there's still air that can kind of get through some of the gaps. But you have a gap between the driver's side window and the A post, and so the driver just sticks his hand up there to kind of deflect to keep the air from coming in the car, to kind of help from a performance standpoint. But if you do that, if I do it with my hand here, all this air is coming through here between my forefinger and my thumb. Well, if I just put a web here with my glove, now that's all this air that's getting blocked, and now it's keeping it out of the inside of the car. Look, when things are down to tenths of second, hundreds of seconds, thousands of seconds, any little bit could help. Now, NASCAR's issue was that they didn't like it because the safety equipment is certified by SFI, which does all the safety certification for all safety things throughout all motorsports. So when you put that webbing design on your fireproof glove, now you have altered the glove. And now, because of that, it is not SFI certified. So from a safety standpoint, that is something NASCAR doesn't like. Also, NASCAR doesn't like that people are using safety elements, a glove, and altering it for a performance advantage. And that's why at Atlanta that they made Joey start at the rear of the field and then make him do a pass-through penalty as a performance issue. And then there was the penalty with related to the safety aspect.
Well, I gotta ask you, do you think they made the right choice?
Well, you can't be altering safety stuff, because if you're going to allow people to alter gloves, okay, well, what's next? Well, can they do something with their uniform, or can they do something else with some other safety element of the car? And the more you do that, at what point is somebody doing something and now they're compromising an element of safety? What if there's a fire and somehow the fire seeps through or whatever, the webbing is not as well done on that glove, and now the driver's hand gets burned or something, or there's something else that leads to something else. So I think that's kind of the issue, is basically NASCAR says, look, you're not going to mess with safety stuff. And if you do, there's going to be a penalty.
Absolutely. Which I know I've seen people online kind of complaining about that issue. So I wanted to bring it up to you.
Sure.
And get your opinion on it. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you was one time part of the Hall of Fame, of like a voter thing.
Yes. First 6 years or so, I want to say it was a Hall of Fame voter. And that was originally when the Hall of Fame came into being. I was the president of the National Motorsports Press Association. And so a voting position was given to the president of the National Motorsports Press Association at the time. That was me. After my term ended after 2 years, I was still allowed to be on the voting panel for a few more years. And then when I had a job at Motor Racing Network, there were certainly some other individuals who'd been there longer and were on the voting panel. And so they were trying to add some more different people from some different groups into the voting panel. And I think at MRN, had I been on there, I think we would have had like 6 or 7 of the 50 some voters. So we would have had pretty much a good block of people. But yeah, it's I'll tell you what, it was a fascinating experience to be in that room with the future Hall of Famers, the movers and shakers of the sport, and just to kind of hear the discussions that went on those early years on who to put in and how people were voting or what they were thinking about or considering. I think one of the great things they did back then, I still think they do it now, is with the Hall of Fame, is there are no guidelines. They don't say, hey, if driver X has 50 wins, they need to go in the Hall of Fame. That's going to happen, but they allow each voter to determine what is most important to them in making the selection that they do, which back then for me was 5. Now it's 3 that you make, as they've changed that policy. But I think they do a really good job of just letting the voters decide. Certainly the fans will say some years the voters get it more right than other years. But I think everybody who's gotten in has deserved in. Maybe you can make the argument, and I think you can, on some individuals that maybe they should have gotten in sooner than they did. But I think everybody who's gotten in is certainly deserved to be in the Hall of Fame.
Okay. Speaking of the Hall of Fame, is there anybody that you want to see go into the Hall of Fame? Which I know, which I guess recently there was Jimmy Johnson and Chad Canals and all of them. But do you got someone in mind that you like to see in the Hall of Fame?
I think at some point a guy like Ricky Rudd from Chesapeake, Virginia would be a good one to be in the Hall of Fame. Obviously, his candidacy is hurt a bit because he does not have that championship, but he won a race. What was it? Was it 17 consecutive years, if I'm not mistaken? At one point, he had the Ironman streak for most consecutive starts. He was a driver. He was a driver owner. He won as a driver owner at Indianapolis and scored that big victory. I think Ricky is somebody that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I think he'll get in there at some point, but when, I don't know. But that would be one that would be, maybe somebody that some people may have maybe forgotten about a little bit, but I'd say don't forget about Ricky Rudd.
Absolutely. Now, if you can pick 4 people for a NASCAR Mount Rushmore, and who would it be?
Well, I think it depends on what you want to do. If you want to look at drivers, it's one thing. If you want to look at overall the sport, do you put Bill France Sr. on it because he was the one who created it? Because without the guy who created it, you don't have anybody else that comes out after that. So if I'm looking at that, I would put Bill France Sr. on it. If I'm looking at drivers, certainly I would put, it's hard not to put the 3 7-time champions in Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, and Jimmy Johnson. Then that leaves one spot. I think I would probably put David Pearson. And to me, Pearson had the 3 championships. Could he have won more? Potentially, but he didn't typically run full seasons, especially with the Wood brothers. And so they would pick and choose. And look, he still got over 100 wins. And so I think David Pearson, and, you look at the success he had at Darlington and such a driver's track there, really showed his ability. So, for drivers, I think it would be the 3 7-time champions and David Pearson. And then I'd be looking at trying to find a few more spaces and expand Mount Rushmore to like 7, 8 spots.
Absolutely. Now, what are some of the big, the big stories to look out for in 2024?
Well, I think, it's going to be, how these teams have done with the new bodies. Obviously, Ford and Toyota had new bodies this year, and how they've been able to perform, and how Chevrolet has been able to perform with the same body as last year. Certainly that'll change, impact what you're seeing with racing. Or is it going to be a year where there are, 15, 16 different winners before the playoffs start? Or is it going to be somebody that's dominant? Obviously Kyle Larson, in his quest for to run the Indy 500 and Coke 600 will be something that will gain a lot of attention first part of the year. So, but yeah, I think it's just going to be like, what kind of competition are you going to see this season in NASCAR, and how it's kind of the ebbs and flows, and who's up and who's down. And there's always somebody that's, surprising that is down. I mean, nobody would have expected Chase Elliott not to make the playoffs last year, or Alex Bowman to think that half of Hendrick Motorsports didn't make the playoffs. last year. And, for as good as Michael McDowell is on road courses, I'm not sure many people would have picked him to win and make the playoffs last year, but he won on the Indianapolis road course and he made the playoffs. So that takes a spot. So who are those that can take a spot, who can climb up and, advance from the first to the second round? And who's going to be your final four in Phoenix, and who wins that championship? Again, I'll tell you what, in May of 2023, even though Blaney won the Coca-Cola 600, I think even after that win, I don't know if many people were thinking Ryan Blaney is going to be the champion this year. So I think that's fascinating to think, is that you can be in late May and maybe not even know who the champion is going to be, even though some other drivers are hotter than others. And look, that's the great thing about the playoffs, or some people say that maybe that's the bad thing about the playoffs, but is you just have to kind of build up to it and get hot at the right time, and you can win the championship. Now, that being said, Blaney's championship was still well-deserved, even though he didn't have the regular season that he wanted. I mean, he still had to win races in the playoffs and did, and still had to perform at Phoenix, and he did. And so he is a worthy champion because he did what he had to do.
Absolutely. Now, NASCAR brought back the North Wilkesboro Speedway for the All-Star race. Do you think that they could bring back some more racetracks like Rockingham?
I think Rockingham would like to have something like that. I think the challenge will be, one of the reasons the sport went away from those tracks is because you had so many tracks concentrated in a short distance from Charlotte. North Wilkesboro's an hour and a half away. Martinsville's a couple hours away. Darlington is an hour and a half away or so. Rockingham's an hour plus drive. Richmond, Bristol is 3 hours away. Richmond is a 4 or 5 hour drive. That's a lot of races all within a concentrated area. And that was one of the reasons why back in the late 90s, the sport was moving away from those tracks and going to places like Las Vegas and Homestead and Kansas, and expanding its footprint across the country, taking races to areas of the country that didn't have NASCAR races, but had NASCAR fans. And as opposed to this area that was oversaturated. It reminds me of a conversation. Obviously there was a lot of excitement after that Atlanta race this year with that 3-wide finish and the spectacular racing. That reminds me of a conversation that was with William Byron, the Daytona 500 winner this year, who said he enjoyed Atlanta, but said he did not want to have turn Texas Motor Speedway into another Atlanta with that type of racing, because he says, look, once you get something good, you don't want to oversaturate it. It's easy for people to want to say, hey, let's go do this here, let's go do this here, and suddenly it's not special because you're doing it at so many places. And I think that's something the sport has to be very careful about. And while there is certainly a history with Rockingham and has provided some fantastic moments in the sport, I think part of the challenge is, how do you put it in there where it's not oversaturating the market? Now, is it something you can put a truck race or maybe even an Xfinity race in at some point? Maybe. Is it something that you do maybe a one-time cup event but you're not coming back and it's like, hey, we'll do this 1 year? Maybe that's the case, but I think there's a lot of things that have to go into that. And I think it'll be challenging for Rockingham to get into the schedule, especially as NASCAR is looking to go international. They're looking to go across the country and beyond the country's borders, as opposed to going a few counties over from Charlotte. And again, look, Rockingham's had great memories and it's provided some really, really great racing, but I think it's going to be tougher to bring that one back on the NASCAR schedule than it was for North Wilkesboro. And it took North Wilkesboro, nearly 30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and where do you see NASCAR in the next few years, and who do you think would be a top star then?
Well, I think obviously with NASCAR, you start next year, you got the new media rights deal. So, NBC is back doing the races. We'll be doing the last 14 races of the season from 2025 to 2031. You'll have Fox doing the first 14 races, and you'll have, Amazon, Amazon Prime, and then Warner's Brothers, TNT doing, 5 races each. So, there will be 5 races that'll be streamed. That'll be the only way to watch it. So that'll be a change for the sport, and that'll be a change for the fans. Obviously, you see that in the NFL, the Thursday night Amazon football game. Here at NBC that with my group, we have Peacock, and they put a regular season football game on Peacock, and they put a wild card playoff game, NFL game on Peacock. The first time that the NFL streamed a game online, and I think we had 23 million viewers for that game. So there's people will find ways to watch the sport. As for the future, I think you look at what's happened the last few years, and 3 of the last 4 champions were drivers who, when they won the championship, were under the age of 30. Does that continue? And certainly if it does, that there will be drivers that those are drivers that should be around for the next 15, 20 years. And it'll help create a large fan base, and they'll have a large fan following because people are familiar with them. It'll also be exciting to see who are the next young stars that will start pushing that group of this current generation, who will be in the next generation. So there's always somebody coming along, and it's always fascinating to watch to see how far they can go. I mean, look, nobody thought Jimmy Johnson was going to be a 7-time champion. The guy won one race in what is now the Xfinity Series, and that was a fuel mileage race at Chicago. And he did not, based off of that, nobody would have expected him to be a 7-time champion, let alone a 1-time champion. And look at what he's become. So I think that's the neat thing about watching these drivers come up, is you don't know who's going to be the next superstar. You have an idea, but there can be somebody that comes up and surprises.
Do you think Jimmy Johnson might win another championship, or do you think he's just a car in the field, just trying to fill a spot?
Yeah, he's not looking to run full time. So he likes running the select races. I think he's doing 9 races this season. So I think he's happy with that. He's got a lot of other things that he does, obviously, along with being co-owner of Legacy Motor Club. So with where he is in his career, this scratches the itch, but he's not looking to be out there for 38 total race weekends a year. So he's good with about 9 and can do some other things.
Absolutely. Now, and where can people find you on social media?
On X or Twitter is just at Dustin Long, just at DUSTINLONG. I've got if you look up my name under Facebook, I've got a professional page there that I also post stories. I have a Threads account and an Instagram account. So I'm out there in some form or fashion in some various ways on social media.
Absolutely. Now, towards the end of the podcast, I like to ask my guests if they got a closing thoughts for the people that's listening. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But you got a closing thought.
Just follow your dreams. I from an early age, I wanted to be a sports writer. And the idea that I'm working in a company like NBC just blows my mind every day. And it's just, if you work at it and put the time and effort in and get a few breaks here and there, maybe, you can accomplish some great things. And so, I love being able to have this platform to tell stories and to tell some of the behind the scenes stories of those, in the garage, of the drivers, of the crew members, of the people involved in the sport, for the fans out there, to help get them a little bit closer to their favorite sport, to their favorite athlete, to their favorite team. So, like I said, what I've been able to do is I had high hopes as a young kid, but this is even bigger and better than what I ever thought I could do.
Absolutely. Dustin, so I want to thank you for coming on the podcast to talk about what you do and also talk about NASCAR.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jacob. I appreciate it, man. Have a good one.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right, that wraps up on this week for Conversations with Jacob. Tune in next week for another episode. Until then, and God bless, and we'll catch you in the next one.